8 years after the dissolution of my marriage, my daughter has initiated communication with me regarding the inheritance I am entitled to. My divorce from my wife, who was 48 at the time, was finalized 8 years ago. My daughter, who is 28, has chosen to sever all contact with me and align herself with her mother, despite the fact that I have made significant strides in accepting the circumstances of my divorce and moving on with my life. My ex-wife's actions have contributed to the complexity of this process. My wife's actions were designed to completely destroy my reputation. This was motivated by my genuine love for my daughter. Being completely shut out from her life was more challenging than I had anticipated. At the time, she was an adult, and there was no way for me to be in her life unless she wanted me to be. She appeared to be certain of her decision to prioritize her mother over me. I did not have any family of my own, except for my mother, who was suffering from Alzheimer's. Consequently, I was left to navigate this challenging situation alone. The experience was undoubtedly one of the most challenging and distressing events in my life. I attempted to communicate with my daughter on numerous occasions following the dissolution of our marriage, but she was adamant about aligning herself with her mother and was unwilling to consider my perspective. At one point, my former spouse reached out to me and initiated legal proceedings for harassment. This served as a clear indication that my actions were causing distress and that I needed to cease contact with my daughter. Over the past 8 years, I have devoted my time and energy to caring for my mother and pursuing my career. I have had a few casual relationships, but I have struggled to trust another person after my divorce. This has been my life for nearly a decade. I apologize if I come across as a pessimist. Recently, my daughter reached out to me after a long period of time. I was overjoyed and thought that she had finally forgiven me. Over the past 8 years, I have been responsible for the care of my mother and have concentrated on my professional career. I have had a few casual relationships, but I feel that I cannot fully trust another person after my divorce. This has been my life for nearly a decade. I apologize if I appear to be a negative influence. The reason I am writing this post is because my daughter recently contacted me after a considerable period of time. I was extremely happy and thought that she came to understand that the divorce was not solely my fault. This was particularly comforting, as my mother had recently passed away, and I had been dealing with that grief on my own. I was therefore grateful for the opportunity to provide some comfort and family support. My daughter reached out to me a few months after my mother's passing. I received a call from a number I did not recognize, and I picked up to hear a woman's voice. On the other end of the line, I was unaware that it was my daughter and could not recognize her voice, as it had been a considerable length of time since we had spoken. I was quite taken aback when she introduced herself and informed me that she had seen on Facebook that her grandmother had passed away and wanted to check in with me. I was somewhat disconcerted, as I was not aware that she kept tabs on me online and thought it was a thoughtful gesture. I thanked her for calling and expressed my gratitude for her concern. She informed me that I was doing well and expressed her desire to meet in person. We conversed for a brief period and she suggested that if I wished to catch up in person, rather than by telephone, she would be amenable to this. I was overjoyed at the prospect of meeting her after all these years and agreed immediately. We arranged to meet at my house over the weekend. I was extremely excited about meeting her after all these years and felt compelled to share my excitement with anyone who might be reading this. I hope that we can rebuild our relationship or at least get to know each other. My daughter came over to have dinner with me because I wanted to cook for her. I was nervous and excited when I first opened the door. I did not recognize her because it has been nearly a decade since I last saw her and she was just a little girl at the time. We started talking, and although it was a little awkward at first, we eventually opened up to each other. Initially, the conversation was somewhat awkward. However, as time passed, both parties gradually opened up and shared information about their lives. After dinner, the topic of the divorce was finally addressed. I inquired about her decision to side with her mother during the proceedings, given that I had been more involved as a parent. I acknowledged that her mother had been a more present figure in her life due to her availability. I was a stay-at-home mother and, at the time, I was employed in the construction industry, working long hours. However, I always made an effort to spend as much time as possible with my daughter. My daughter subsequently expressed regret about the situation and stated that she was too young to fully comprehend the situation and was influenced by how her mother presented the facts. My ex-wife painted me as the ultimate bad guy who didn't care about anyone except himself. She never got to hear my side of the story, so she never questioned whatever her mother said. We talked for hours, and things were going well until she finally revealed why she was there. We had been talking for hours at that point when I asked her what made her reach out. After considerable time had elapsed, she appeared somewhat uneasy. I encouraged her to be candid, and she proceeded to inform me that she had been monitoring my activities on Facebook. Upon learning of her grandmother's demise, she presumed that legal counsel would contact her regarding her inheritance. When no such communication ensued, she concluded that it would be prudent to contact me directly. She indicated that she wished to grant me some time and space to grieve, but she had recently become engaged and required financial assistance to cover wedding expenses. I felt as though I had been struck in the abdomen. In fact, I had assumed that my prayers had been answered and that I would be able to have a family again. However, it subsequently became apparent that she had never cared for me in the first place. The location and circumstances were a means for her to obtain her inheritance. It is noteworthy that it is not legally hers, it is, in fact, mine. Had she been a more dutiful daughter, she would have likely received the majority, if not all, of it. I am not particularly concerned with financial matters, I have never been. I reside in a house that I own, do not engage in expensive hobbies, and purchase only what I need. Even if the inheritance were not in question, I would have been willing to assist with her wedding. However, I was disconcerted by her lack of consideration and her apparent sole focus on the inheritance. These thoughts were simultaneously occurring in my mind. I managed to maintain my composure and inquired as to her intentions. She asserted that she had already obtained the inheritance and that her primary objective was to establish a connection with me. She expressed remorse for not reaching out to me while her grandmother was alive, stating that she had desired to contact me for years but lacked the courage to do so because she feared that I would never forgive her for her actions. Without providing an explanation, she asserted that she had also been manipulated by her mother. However, I could discern from her distressed demeanor that she was merely attempting to reconcile our differences so that I might forgive her. I was curious as to whether her primary motivation was financial. I inquired about her knowledge of the inheritance. She informed me that a few years prior to the dissolution of our marriage, she had visited my late mother and she informed her that she desired for her to inherit the entirety of the estate left by my father, who had passed away years prior. As I was the only grandchild in the family, I did not have any siblings. At that point in time, my marriage was stable, so I can comprehend why my mother might have said that to my daughter. If the divorce had never occurred or if my daughter had not abandoned me for years after the divorce, the money would have been hers. The inheritance would have been hers had I not already mentioned this, but the thought of her only caring about the money and giving me false hope was extremely distressing. I was devastated, but I did my best not to let her know at that moment. I considered the only way of testing my daughter's intentions to be to see how she would react if I told her there was no money to inherit. I inquired as to her expectations regarding the inheritance and she provided a reasonably accurate estimation. It was evident that she had conducted some degree of planning in anticipation of this outcome. I then informed her that I was sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that her grandmother had in fact bequeathed all of her assets to me years ago. I further explained that I intended to utilize this inheritance to launch a business venture, which precluded my ability to assist her. I extended an offer to assist with her wedding expenses. With my own funds, I offered to contribute a few $1,000s towards the wedding expenses. Her expression of disappointment confirmed my worst fears. She expressed gratitude for my offer but asserted that, as the sole grandchild, she deserved at least some of the inheritance, given that it was her grandmother's money. I informed her that I wished I could help her, but that my decision was final and there was nothing I could do. I was prepared to provide her with additional financial assistance if she was dissatisfied with the amount I was offering. However, she became visibly distressed and expressed her displeasure with my decision. She requested that I reconsider my stance, but I reiterated that I was committed to my original decision and that I would not be swayed. At this point, she revealed her true intentions, which confirmed my suspicions about her true motivations. She informed me that she should have been aware that I would always be perceived as selfish, just as her mother had described me. She expressed satisfaction that I was currently single. I regarded her with barely concealed disdain as she spoke. Her words were hurtful, but at that point, I was prepared for such a response. I had not anticipated, however, that she would be so candid so quickly. She began to say something else, but I intervened. She was able to speak, and I informed her that I should have known she was her mother's daughter and that the only reason she would reach out to anyone was to ask for a favor. I also informed her that using the fact that I was grieving for my mother to try and manipulate me was disgusting, even for a person like her. She attempted to say something at that point, but I simply laughed in her face and she asserted that had she not blocked me years ago, she would have received my text about her grandmother and likely would have received the majority, if not all, of the inheritance. This statement had the desired effect. She appeared perplexed and inquired as to my meaning. I advised her to unblock me on her previous number so that I could resend her all the messages that had been unable to reach her. She did, in fact, deliver the message effectively. I proceeded to forward all the texts in which I had implored her to hear me out and even informed her that her grandmother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I had wanted them to meet before she forgot about her only grandchild completely. This was, in fact, entirely accurate, as at the beginning of her illness, my mother frequently mentioned my daughter and expressed a desire to see her. I distinctly recall how. It was a source of profound sadness to me that I was unable to fulfill this wish. Now, this ungrateful and cruel child had the audacity to request an inheritance from my daughter's credit. I will admit that she appeared ashamed after reading all of those messages. She apologized to me, but said that, upon reflection, it was evident that her grandmother would have wanted her to receive her share of the inheritance. It is unjust to punish her in this manner. She stated that she was young and lacked the necessary experience to navigate the divorce process effectively. Alternatively, she asserted that she would have handled the situation differently had she been more informed. Furthermore, she expressed a genuine desire to rebuild our relationship. However, if money is the primary factor influencing her decision-making, then it is unlikely that she will feel comfortable continuing our relationship. I informed her that if financial considerations were the primary factor influencing her decision-making, then it would be difficult for us to maintain a relationship. If the dissolution of our relationship is contingent upon her financial circumstances, then perhaps it would be more prudent to refrain from any further romantic involvement. I initially sought to believe her assertion that she was willing to rebuild our relationship, but at that juncture, I was unable to do so. I informed her that I would consider giving our relationship another chance, but the inheritance was an absolute non-starter. She regarded me with pure hatred and departed from my residence. I did not attempt to dissuade her from her decision. Since that time, I have discussed the matter with several of my acquaintances. The majority of them concur that I acted appropriately. However, one of my closest associates posited that, given my lack of attachment to the financial resources in question, should simply acquiesce and permit my daughter to receive a portion of them. This suggestion is not aligned with my personal beliefs, particularly in light of the fact that, following his pronouncement, I am unable to dismiss the notion that I should provide my daughter with a portion of my inheritance. Greetings. This post has elicited a greater response than I anticipated. I am grateful for the advice and opinions shared, as they have provided me with the perspective I sought. I will begin by addressing the most common inquiry, the circumstances surrounding my divorce. I have not discussed this matter for an extended period, but I believe it is time to provide some context. Given the passage of time, it seems unlikely that my wife would still be capable of betraying me in such a way. However, she did, after we had been married for 23 years. I do not intend to provide a detailed account of the circumstances, but I discovered that she had been unfaithful to me for a considerable period of time. I was devastated when I finally became aware of this. I was unsure of how to proceed, so I began consuming alcohol excessively and engaging in sexual relationships. I nearly destroyed my life. I engaged in frequent conflict with my wife and believed that my drinking and the resulting emotional volatility made it easier for her to influence my daughter to take her side. After nearly a year of this, we finally confronted each other and initiated divorce proceedings. My wife was a journalist at the time and enjoyed a certain degree of local celebrity status. She attempted to destroy my reputation, and her efforts were nearly successful following the divorce. It required a significant investment of time to cease drinking and resume a normal lifestyle. As previously stated, my daughter's complete abandonment of me was a significant challenge. I acknowledge that when I learned of my ex-wife's infidelity, I experienced a period of emotional instability and a lack of presence. As a parent to my daughter, I was largely absent during the period of my separation and for approximately a year following the dissolution of my marriage. I was preoccupied with my own issues and struggled to provide the level of care and attention my daughter deserved. However, once I achieved sobriety and rebuilt my life, I made it a priority to reconnect with my daughter. I apologized for my past actions and attempted to initiate a dialogue. However, she was unresponsive and blocked me from all communication channels. I believed that allowing her time to process our relationship would eventually lead to a reconciliation. However, this approach did not yield the desired result. 8 years later, the relationship has deteriorated further. With regard to the inheritance, it should be noted that the money in question belonged to my father. My grandparents were both doctors and had purchased property in various locations throughout the city during their careers. The majority of this property was leased out and generated significant income. My father passed away when I was 21 years old, leaving the entirety of his estate to my mother. Throughout my marriage, the property remained in her name. For several years following my divorce, I continued to receive all assets as my mother's sole heir until her death. My wife, however, was not entitled to any portion of the estate until she remarried a few years ago. As my mother was the sole proprietor at the time, my daughter never came into possession of any assets. She was aware that her grandmother was a property owner and had a few heirlooms, but I never touched any of that money because the income one generated from my former construction business was sufficient to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. I hope I have addressed all of your inquiries. My daughter has not contacted me since that evening, and I believe she will not do so in the future. In my opinion, she made it evident that she only staged this performance for the inheritance, and now that it is no longer a possibility, I do not anticipate seeing her again. I must concede that I am somewhat disconcerted by this turn of events. Nevertheless, I have learned not to anticipate too much from individuals, regardless of their identity. Consequently, I am at a loss as to how to proceed. I am grateful for the support you have extended. I believe it may be time for me to pursue a more active social life and to seek companionship, rather than relying on past relationships. I have had a rather eventful week, gentlemen. I had not anticipated this turn of events. I had intended to provide this update as a final communication, but circumstances have intervened. I had just returned from work and was contemplating an evening out with a couple of friends when the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone, but I opened the door and found her standing there. It took me a moment to recognize her, but it was clear that she had undergone significant changes, including a new hairstyle and weight loss. It was a jarring encounter, given that we had been together for decades. Her appearance was a considerable shock. I was unsure of how to respond, so I simply stood there, feeling somewhat awkward. She then inquired if I had a moment to discuss some matters. I was initially reluctant, but I did not want her to linger at my doorstep. I thus invited her inside. The atmosphere was noticeably tense, as one might imagine. We engaged in brief, inconsequential conversation about various topics, and then she stated that she understood the situation might be somewhat unusual, but she had some things to discuss. She informed me that our daughter had reached out to her and informed her of the inheritance. I had anticipated this development. I mean, why else would she need to speak to me after all those years? She proceeded to express her understanding of the divorce being a difficult experience for me and that she had taken things further than she probably should have. I reacted with skepticism, but she ignored my reaction. She then suggested that I should not punish my daughter for what had transpired between us. She proceeded to reiterate the same sentiments my daughter had expressed previously, such as her being very young at the time of the divorce and how I could not be resentful towards her for choosing her mother over me. I cut her off at that point and asserted that I had no resentment towards anyone anymore and that even if I held on to any anger, it would not be directed towards her daughter. I told her that I was hurt by the situation. She suggested that I should punish my daughter for the events that transpired between us. She echoed the sentiments expressed by my daughter, namely that I was too young at the time of the divorce and that I should not harbor resentment towards her for choosing her mother over me. I interjected at this point, stating that I no longer harbor any resentment towards anyone and that even if I did, it would not be directed towards her daughter. I informed her that I was hurt by her actions. I informed her that, after all those years, she only thought of reaching out to her father because there was a possibility of getting some money out of it. I told her the same thing I told my daughter, that if she had the decency to try and reconnect earlier, she would have ended up with the inheritance. My ex attempted to provide a defense, but I informed her that my decision was final and that, if they were merely going to engage in futile debate, they would be wasting everyone's time. I informed them that they were wasting everyone's time on this matter. I informed them that I had plans and that if there was nothing else to discuss, they should leave. They nodded and apologized for bothering me. I informed them that there was no need for that and that they should leave. They left after they left. I was in disbelief. I had never expected to ever see her again, let alone have a conversation in my home. It was strange and brought up a lot of old memories. I would prefer not to dwell on this matter further. I went out with friends and attempted to forget about it. This did not work, and I felt compelled to share my thoughts with you. I am grateful for your attention. I needed to express my feelings because I hope you will understand. I have another update for you. This afternoon, I was at work when I received a call from my daughter. I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up. I picked up and immediately told her I informed her that if this was about the inheritance, there was no point in us having a conversation. She proceeded to inform me that there was something else she wanted to talk about. I requested that she proceed with the matter at hand. She stated that she had been contemplating the incident and felt compelled to apologize. She acknowledged that she should have handled the situation differently and that if I was willing to forgive her and rebuild our relationship, she would do so. She then proposed that we resume our relationship, suggesting that I might be invited to her wedding. I was taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. I inquired as to her sincerity and she confirmed that she was indeed certain about her decision. She then suggested that I might take some time to consider her proposal and inform her of my decision. I agreed and we concluded the conversation. I am currently experiencing a state of confusion. On the one hand, I am overjoyed at the prospect of attending her wedding. However, on the other hand, I cannot shake the feeling that this is just some elaborate ploy. In order for her to be on my good side and eventually receive the inheritance, I must consider the possibility that she is being genuine. If I were to reject her overtures and she were to cease all contact, I would be hard-pressed to blame her. I would therefore appreciate any advice that could help me navigate this situation. Update 4. I have decided to attend the wedding. Many of you have suggested that attending the wedding would not be detrimental. I agree that this course of action is not obligatory. Furthermore, I do not believe that I would be required to reciprocate in any way for being invited. I have been informed that I am not included in the wedding party. I have been advised that I will be a guest at the wedding. I am content with this arrangement, as I understand that it would be a significant transition for me to go from not having spoken to the bride for 8 years to being the person who walks her down the aisle at the wedding. Neither of us would likely be comfortable with that. I hope that this is the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, and that we can build something meaningful together. Thank you to everyone who has listened to me and provided advice. I appreciate your input, and I hope that you will wish me luck.